Hey, what's up? Zach here, and today I've got the all-new Nike KD16, and here are all the pros and cons of them that you need to know about. Here we go. And in reality, the KD16 is a little bit of a departure from the 14s and the 15s, so there are a lot of things you gotta know about them really before you wanna buy them, and no more is that apparent than in the uppers. And typically in KD line shoes, I'm used to seeing things in the uppers that are just a little bit different. You just may have something just extra for containment, like the scythe strap, or in the 15s, like the really strong plastic cage. Now in the 16s, you have this pretty broad plastic here on the medial and lateral sides for the main foxing and containment elements of the uppers. And it's interesting that it is actually stitched into this synthetic leather that goes all the way around the shoe. But right in between that synthetic leather piece and then the synthetic leather that kind of reinforces the lace line, you get this like really buttery, soft, like woven mesh here. And it doesn't really have a lot of TPU elements in it, and it is very soft. There's really no break into it. When the top of your foot touches it, it almost feels like a sheer or silk on your foot. It is actually, it's nice. And when you go up into the lace line of the shoe, the lace line is actually pretty wide on these. The eyelets kind of face out, so it is a pretty broad lockdown. You do need that because there is just so much plastic on the medial and lateral sides of it, and it is so broad that you just need a little bit more of a substantial kind of lacing system to pull it all around you. Now, what I noticed on these is you want to get any lockdown whatsoever, you do have to crank on those laces because it does kind of want to retain its shape going outwards. I will show you how you can counteract that in the fit section. One you probably haven't thought of yet, so make sure you stick around for that. But you know, speaking of that lace line and tongue, the tongue has something on these I really have not seen in any other shoe recently, and that's almost like a rubberized reinforcement underneath of the tongue. Now it has these massive ventilation channels going through it, and if you look at the breathability test on these, they heated up 125.6 degrees, then cooled down another 84.9 degrees. Typically you don't see that unless the shoe's heating up around into like the 200-degree Fahrenheit range, so these do let go of heat very efficiently. This is a massive gusseted tongue, so you are getting a lot of material around your foot, but even for something more maximalist underneath, it does let go of heat pretty well. The one thing that really did annoy me about these though was the medallion here on the tongue. It is just a solid piece of plastic and it's pretty hard, and so it's not like some of them where it just compresses when you lace it. You just kind of got to make sure that the laces don't come over top of it because it will push into your ankle and really annoy you. So when I was tying it down, I really had to like pay attention where my laces were. There is no popping this, there's no bubble there or anything, that it's just there, so just make sure you lace around it or it's gonna get annoying. And on the upper durability test, 10-second tie grit sandpaper, the burr does a lot of cosmetic damage to that synthetic leather, however it doesn't get through it. So you know, these are more meant for indoor shoes obviously, so I think if you're dragging or sliding on rubber or hardwood, you should be just fine. Carpet might start to scuff these up, but honestly, as long as you're not too aggressive on them, it should be okay. But getting into the midsole teardown, this is really where my love-hate relationship with the KD16 kind of starts and ends. First thing is, it is a full bed of Cushlon foam, and you know, this Cushlon does feel like a little bit more of a forgiving formulation of Phylon. However, anytime you want to know the difference between Cushlon and Phylon, just look at it under the microscope. Cushlon is always going to look less dense under the microscope. Those air pockets are always going to be a little bit wider, more full of air, because Cushlon is a little bit more forgiving than Phylon is. Phylon looks a lot more dense on the microscope, so that's how you can tell that. However, if you look at it, is a rear foot air Strobel unit, which is pretty comfortable, and you get into the forefoot, you get a pretty chunky zoom air unit in there with some undulation, so it's almost like a quasi zoom turbo unit, not thin enough, and it doesn't have enough break points in it to really be like a flexible zoom turbo unit. However, you also get this shank that goes from the midfoot all the way up into the tip of the toes in the forefoot, which is bottom loaded, which is kind of like in the Curry Flow line of shoes, so it does give a nice little snap when you're up on the balls of your foot. You can't feel that underfoot. The thing is I'm used to the KD lines having Cushlon and Zoom Strobel. That's just kind of what my foot likes to feel in a KD line shoe, and I do love Air Strobel. I love it in the Del Dons, I love it in the Zions. However, that's kind of the Zion line, you know, that's kind of its signature right now. That's going to a drop-in, you know, and the KD's taking over the Air Strobel unit. I do kind of wish we had something in the Nike lineup besides the GT Jump and the GT Jump 2 that has Air Strobel, because a lot of people like that, and a lot of people want that in their shoe. but they don't want to have to go for something so maximalist like the GT Jump 2 is. And if you look at the bounce height test, those material choices do affect the performance. In the rear foot, only got 27.5 centimeters of bounce height versus in the forefoot with 45.5 centimeters. And remember, Air Strobel, like Air Max, much more meant for shock absorption, shock redistribution versus Air Zoom, which has all that air tension in it and wants to push back on you. So these are going to be a much more forgiving shoe versus on the 15s, which are a little bit more, a snappy type shoe, a little bit more of a bouncy, a little more tension feeling underfoot. Now looking at the outsole tread of the KD16, this is really something you got to pay attention to if you want to buy them or not, because it does have a little bit of a different grip profile than you might be used to with some other KD shoes. Now this is a quasi, I guess, steampunk or gear type tread pattern. The thing I like about it is it does have circular patterns like in the PG6. It does have some waves, some kind of quasi herringbone. So it does have a nice mix of tread. However, it's also encased in just this kind of like a gentle wave around there, but then it has two pretty distinct lines going around it, which separates the dyed rubber from the clear rubber on the inside. Now, what I noticed with that is, number one, this tread takes a solid 10 minutes to warm up to temperature to get it to grip at all. And even at that, it's a more forgiving grip. You are not going to get a squeaky, tight, really tacky grip on these things. It's just not what they're meant for. They have a little bit of give to them. It's not bad whatsoever, but if you are trying to make an incredibly hard cut in them, you are going to, it is just going to give a little bit underneath of you. What I noticed is in the forefoot, if you put down a lot of pressure, that's when you get the best grip on them. And then also I noticed that in terms of a shoe for indoor versus outdoor, even though you probably can get these in just an XDR, for outside, you're gonna start to wear down the interface between the inner rubber and the outer rubber, and that's what produces most of the grip, not these gears or these steampunk gears in the middle. It's this interface between these two lines on the outside and the inside, and that difference between the two rubbers, because the durometers are different, and that's what's producing the most grip. As soon as you start to wear that down, especially on a gritty outdoor court, the traction's gonna start to get really weird on these. So if you're gonna get them, I would get these just really for indoor use, because you're gonna get the most longevity and the most reproducible grip that way. I mean, and just speaking of that grip, you look at the speed ratio of these things, they come in at a 2.42, which actually is kind of, high average or above average for a basketball shoe, especially as, maximalist as this shoe is in the uppers. And they do have a decent kind of second or third step. The launch is okay on them because that shank goes into the forefoot. You can just, you can use the Zoom Air unit really efficiently with it, but just kind of the clunkiness of the shoe and just kind of how boxy and maximalist it is is not the most streamlined shoe out there. So these are much more meant for, kind of maneuverability in certain situations, which we'll get to in the playability section. And they are very forgiving for going coast to coast, but just don't expect them to be like a super streamlined shoe like the KD15 was. And on the outsole durability test, 10 seconds, highest grit sandpaper. The interesting thing is the durometer is higher on the peripheral rubber than it is on the central rubber. However, the peripheral rubber, the burr got right down through to the tread depth. It was like 1.5 millimeters of damage on 1.5 millimeters of tread depth, versus on the clear rubber, where it's just about 1 millimeter of damage on almost like a 2 to 3 millimeter tread depth on there. So like I said, you are going to probably start to wear the outside down first, and you're going to be relying on the inside rubber, which I think it'll still grip fine, because like I said, the tread pattern it's okay. You're getting a lot of different types of treads, multi-directional type treads, and different angles of treads as well. It's gonna be different. So you might just be getting almost used to a different tread profile once the treads start to break in. And getting into the all-important fit of the KD16, they're actually pretty forgiving in width. They are actually a little bit stubby in length though. So narrow medium foot can just go true to size. I even think a 2E can go true to size if you're okay just a little bit of break-in on them. However, a 2E can go up a half size just fine. Now, in terms of the lockdown issues I touched upon earlier in the video, like I said, you do have to crank down these pretty good to stop your heel from slipping in them, especially because, the rear foot and just kind of the underside of the uppers in general is kind of sheer, so there's not a lot of friction there. However, I did remember a trick I learned from an employee of Fleet Feet. When we were both there, I was a student treating ultra marathoners during the middle of their 100-mile marathon runs. They got into a lot of issues during those, you can imagine. But one one of these employees of Fleet Feet actually brought this hole punch in with him to sure up people's shoes, or because they would start to lose laces, or laces would start to pop, or their lace eyelets would pop. So he brought this leather hole punch in, and I just remembered it a little while ago, so I went and bought one. It's 19 bucks, but you can measure out, you know, it's a few centimeters away from the back eyelet, and you can actually punch a hole in the back of them, because the KD16 does not have a runner's knot. But if you pull it in here, you can actually just pop, and you can hear it pop through, a runner's knot eyelet in the back of it. And you can make it whatever size you want. They come in a bunch of sizes. Now, this is not going to be as durable as other lace eyelets will be that are reinforced around it. That's why I always talk about reinforcing the laces. However, if you just need this to throw a runner's knot into, and it comes down between that, you're not being able to wear the shoe, and you really want to wear the KD16, that's, you know, that's what I've done in these shoes, and I noticed that the lockdown is substantially better. In terms of the snake bitten foot on the KD16, they're gonna protect a lot. As long as you can get a decent lockdown, you're not gonna have heel slipping. Air Strobel is really forgiving for any rear foot issues. And then the forefoot, that really fat zoom air unit underfoot, and then the shank underneath of that is very protective for any ball of foot type issues. And because they're not super constricting in the midfoot, they're not gonna cramp down on there either. So they are a pretty forgiving shoe, like, you know, the KD14, and to a certain extent that the KD15 was. Just like I said, gotta be the right foot type for it. And speaking of all those bumps and bruises you can get on your foot, if you are somebody with, you know, recurrent foot issues and just haven't been able to get a good solid answer, just because maybe, you know, people you've talked to really don't live and breathe this community like, you know, you and I probably do, then I do offer one-on-one consulting in the description below. If you have any issues like that, you can always go down there and we can work through it together. And getting into the all-important playability of the KD16, the one thing I kept coming back to is they just didn't have the bite that the 15s had or the 14s had. They are a super plush and easily maneuverable shoe. So I would say if you're bringing a lot of, you know, nimble type footwork to the table, these are gonna give you an ultra plush ride underfoot. And like I said, for what they are ultra maneuverable. So if you're someone that, like I said, has light of weight footwork and doesn't rely on the grip of the shoe, you can put a lot of force into the shoe, because I noticed if I really put my weight down on them, they would grip just fine. And if you're someone like Kevin Durant, who can put a ton of force into the shoe and kind of create your own grip, like I said, the easy kind of plush maneuverability of these are gonna be fantastic. You just kind of gotta be the right player for them. I do think someone that is a pretty shifty guard, small power forward, is going to do really well in these. And I did notice, just kind of going up in and around the hoop and just trying to do some creative things, I found these were really fun to do that in, and I found that I could get a nice little springboard under the hoop. So if you are someone that kind of, you know, likes to get very creative, this is a very creative shoe. So like I said, a lot of good and a lot of, you just kind of have to be the right player in them. Like I said, not all good, not all bad, but just, you know, consider all of it before you go to purchase these versus something else, maybe in the Nike lineup, or, you know, anything else. But of course, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the KD16. Do you like the updates to it? Do you like kind of the more like plush, maneuverable, kind of creative, fun type shoe? Or are you looking for something more along the lines of the 14s or 15s? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you want to see another sibling to the KD15, a shoe that actually does have zoom strobel all the way through it, the Nike GT Jump 2, an absolute beast of a new shoe on the market, make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam, and I'll see you somewhere in the Sneakerverse.